Hey there, hope you're having a good day. This is a guide on damage buckets in Genshin Impact. Now, damage buckets, I don't I don't know if that term's used widely. It's what I call them. It's basically everything that compounds other things when you're dealing damage. And you may know immediately why that's important. If you don't, it's probably why you're struggling. Genshin is not a hard game. If you're ignoring any one of these buckets, um, you'll probably struggle in this game. This information is also useful if you want to start min maxing or theory crafting your builds. How are you going to know when instead of an elemental damage goblet you should go for attack percent, for instance? That's this information that I'm going to share with you here. So, a few things to note about um, our discussion on why did it jump all the way down there? That was weird. Our discussion on these damage buckets. Balance is a sign of efficiency, but it is not the goal. In other words, if you find that your attack percent value is 100% and your elemental value is 60%, you should not have a goal to reduce your attack percent to meet the elemental value unless there's a trade off where you can balance them out. That's when you have to do the math and understand that balance is a sign that your build is completely efficient, but that's not necessarily the goal. If there is a trade off, that's when you do the math. How much is it going to reduce this bucket to increase this bucket? And will that increase offset the decrease? Because you do want them to be balanced because that's perfectly efficient, right? That means you're getting the maximum damage. And when I say these compound each other, I want you to picture like a long equation where each of these buckets represents a value that is multiplied by the next value, which is another bucket, which is multiplied by the next one, which is another bucket. Um, Even me just saying that should make it clear that this will increase your damage significantly if you were ignoring this before. So let's go through them real quick, and then I'm going to give you an example from my account of how I use these to change a character. So let's look at base attack. Very straightforward. It's the white number. If I go into my character menu, I'll show you real quick. We go into details here on Bennett. It is this number right here. It's the white number. And I did the wrong one. Hold on. It is this number right here. Yeah, it's that number. The white number is your base attack. To increase that, increase your weapon level, increase your character level. There are really only two ways currently in the game to increase your base attack. This one's not a percentage, unlike the other buckets, which are typically percentages, right? This one's not a percentage, but it is kind of your baseline. For most characters, some characters scale differently, so keep that in mind, but most characters scale with attack. So base attack is sort of that foundational number. You need this as high as you can get it. Next one is attack percent. This is the most plentiful. You probably have a lot of this and don't even realize it. To calculate it can be a little difficult because it's so plentiful. It's kind of just everywhere. It's on your artifacts, it's on your set pieces, it's on your pyro resonance if you have it. There's a quicker way to calculate this, and I'm going to illustrate that with get out of here and go to, I guess we can go to my Ayaka here. If we go to her attributes, I can see she has 907 base attack and 817 is the green number that we're paying attention to here. Okay. So make the way you calculate this kind of a rough value is you look at that green number and put that in your head. Okay. So 817. And then you go to your artifacts and you look at your feather here, and we'll say 300, right? So that brings, I'm going to subtract this value because this is your largest source of flat attack. Not the same as base attack, side note, but you've got flat attack here. Subtract this value from that green number to get a rough estimate of how much your percent attack stat is influencing your stats. So that would be that 817, so that's like 500. And so just like 55% is this bucket value on my Ayaka. Note that I didn't add any kind of buffs that you might normally do. Usually you'd go and apply buffs that you would have on your party that give attack percent, then come back here and do that calculation. But in this case, I would say 55% is my bucket value for attack percent. Now, bonus is any kind of damage bonus added together. All of these add together and they're under the same bucket. That's important to understand. It's not intuitive for people because they might think I have normal attack damage and then I have elemental damage that compound one another, but they don't. They don't do that. They're added together and they make up your bonus damage bucket. Okay. And some common sources of these are your goblet main stat. That's why you usually are advised to put elemental damage on your goblet main stat because it's a huge source of your bonus damage. You've also got some examples are like Gladiator's 4-piece increases your normal attack damage, noting that it only applies to normal attack. It's not going to increase your elemental skill damage or burst damage, which those can be their own categories, but you take every instance of those, add them together on your damage dealing attack that we're talking about, and that makes up this bucket. Okay. And then you've got your crit rate and crit damage, which are just multiplied together. So you take your crit rate, multiply it by your crit damage. So if you had 50% crit rate and 100% crit damage, this bucket value would be 50%, right? 50%. So circlet main stat is your main source of crit on your character. Artifact substats. You've got an artifact set, Blizzard Strayer. These are all ways you can get this. Some weapons will have a substat that's crit. That's why those weapons tend to be very useful, because you'll find that this bucket is harder to come by. This one here, talents, is another bucket. Don't forget about your talents. You see here 50% at level 7. That's your damage increase for just leveling it up to level 7. Don't forget to level your talents. Especially new players may be completely missing this part of character development, is go into your talents here and make sure you go in here and level these up, right? And you level them up with materials, etc. I'm not going to do that right now because I'm not sure if that's what I want to do yet. But you want to level up your talents. Don't forget to do it. That's a huge part of your damage that you may be missing out on. Okay, so these next 4 are their own buckets. Okay, and that's one of the things here. Each of these buckets will compound one another. But there's some complexity from here on. Not everything applies to everything from here on. Amp is probably the simplest in that it is just a 50% or 100% increase to your damage. And what I'm talking about is any reaction that involves pyro. So first starting with, you've got to have pyro, right? And then either hydro or cryo. Hydro or cryo. Those are called amplification reactions because they take the damage instance that triggers it and just multiplies it again, right? And so this is where team composition is important, where you kind of need to have a pyro plus a hydro or a cryo to take advantage of these. These are very powerful. Once you've got a team comp that supports it, you want elemental mastery. And then there are some artifact sets, such as the Witches set, that will increase this by a specific amount, in addition to your elemental mastery. Okay, so for procs are much more complicated, takes a lot more game knowledge. In general, this is free damage. Off-field damage is an example. Zhongli's Pillar. Albedo E, meaning his elemental skill, where he drops a ring, and if you hit someone who's in the ring, it just gives you another instance of damage. Crescent Pike is a huge one. That's a very unique weapon that significantly increases physical damage. You'll see your damage just skyrocket if you put a Crescent Pike on, if you're a physical damage dealer. Raiden E is another source of procs. So that's what I'm talking about here. Proc. Swirl is a big one. Swirl also feeds into resistant shred with Viridescent Venerer. So Swirl is a very powerful proc. On that note, let's talk about defense and resistance shred. These are separate buckets. You might not think they are because it just prevents your damage, but reducing one and reducing the other is further multiplying your damage. So defensive shred is not intuitive as well. A big part of your defensive shred, and probably your only source of defensive shred, is your level. Now, it's a very small amount. I don't want to misrepresent here. You're not going to see huge damage increases by leveling your character, but your character's level is a key part of the damage calculation. If you are level 1 and your enemy's level 90, they have 65% roughly damage reduction. If you are level 90 and they are level 90, they have 50% damage reduction from defense. So it's you see 15% for 90 levels isn't a lot, but it can add up pretty quickly, especially if your level gap is 20, 30 plus. You're going to have multiple percents of damage, and over the course of a long fight, that equates to quite a bit. Now, there are some other ways other than level, and here you'll probably see the true value of these two skills, and that's Lisa and Razor. Both have ways to reduce defense, each by 15%. Razor's may not be as accessible because it's C4, but Lisa, it's her ultimate, and it reduces defense by 15% when you have her Ascension passive. That's huge, and she's a very underutilized character, and I think it's because, like I said, Genshin is relatively easy, so it's not necessary to focus so much on these more complicated buckets. But be aware, like, if you're trying to really maximize things, Lisa can be a good choice in your team. Just based solely on the fact that she's one of the few sources of defense shred. The next one here, resistant shred. You've probably heard people say that Viridescent Venerer is the best set in the game. And this is why. So, Viridescent Venerer, not only will it increase your proc damage of the swirl that you're doing, it will reduce enemy resistance by 40% for the element that was involved in the swirl. So ideally you'd use your main damage dealer, then use Anemo to swirl that element, and then switch back and start dealing more damage. That's why people say that it's the best set. There's also things like Zhongli's Shield. On the Jade Shield description itself, it reduces elemental and physical resistance of opponents in a small AoE by 20%. Traveler has a constellation that will kind of have the same effect of the Viridescent Venerer at 20% as well. There are a few sources of elemental resistance shred. It's an important bucket. Don't forget about it. So let me give my example here on my Raiden, because I built her a little differently. Typically you want to do attack percent on the sands, and then you want to do elemental damage goblet, and then a crit stat on your you want to do a crit stat on your hat. For her, I decided to go attack percent Sands, attack percent Goblet, and a crit damage on her circlet. Now, it's a small change, but the reason why I did that is a few things. One, looking at her emblem of Severed Fate, 75% bonus damage to, or rather 25% of her energy recharge turns into bonus damage to her burst. And her burst is my main source of damage. When she bursts, that's when she's dealing her damage. If she's not, I'm usually switching off of her. And so when I did the calculations on her attributes here, I saw a few things. She already gets some electro damage from her stats, and I believe it is converting her energy recharge directly into electro damage. So like 44% there. And then about 50%, if you look at the energy recharge, 211%, that makes into about 50% bonus from energy recharge. Okay, so we're at roughly 90% for that bucket, for the bonus damage bucket. And then I got my catch here, burst damage by an additional 32%. Okay, so we're looking at like 120 something percent bonus damage from all my sources that apply to my ult, right? So 120% for that bucket. If I switch back to these artifacts, it might be a little clearer why, 45, so 90% attack. If I sacrifice this for additional elemental damage, it would not increase my damage as much as using an attack percent goblet, right? And it also helps that I got really lucky on this goblet and got really good substats. I mean, I don't mean to brag, but I feel pretty good about that one. This one, it's still okay, not as good as the other one. But anyway, so that's what led me to that decision. Is I was looking between the trade-off of attack versus elemental damage, and I did the math and found that it made more sense to go for attack percent goblet, because my sources of bonus damage just added up even without this to very high. I was going to be more efficient going attack percent. And you'll also note that in my stats, my crit rate is only 31.4%. And my crit damage is much higher at like 150%, which isn't the 1-to-2 ratio. That's because I only care about burst damage, and this weapon gives a 12% chance. That brings it to roughly 50%, and to me 50% is a pretty solid place to land, especially I love seeing those big hits from her ult when she first brings it out. But anyway, so I hope you appreciate and enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think. If you have any questions, hope you're having a good day. Bye.